guess that it's not just we Brits who have our quirky ways of celebrating Christmas. I heard again the other evening when Jenny was in the next room doing Treasure Seekers on Zoom that the Japanese traditional meal at Christmas nowadays is, would you believe, KFC. Of course, there are different but still mostly recognisable versions of Father Christmas associated with the different countries too. But I suspect that the British Christmas and New Year pantomime is going to be rather unique. I went to a few of these back in Harlow. My employer at the time thought it'd be a nice little bonus for staff to be able to take their kids along to the pantomime, and that was held at the local Harlow Playhouse. They came home with some pretty good goodie bags too, if I remember right. But since this is a question of kids who largely didn't know one another, in fact, the site was so big that I was working on that all the people who worked for Beecham's didn't necessarily know one another either. So our kids really needed in the younger days to be taken rather than just dropped at the door. And I guess I just got the short straw really and had to sit through the predictable corny jokes and the slapstick fun. Goodness knows how it all developed, but who cares really? The kids innocently laugh out loud at the sometimes rather risque antics of the pantomime dames. They shout at the tops of their voices that it's behind you. They very properly boo and hiss when the big baddie makes his appearance. Pantomime villain, yeah. And maybe at first appearance, there is a pantomime villain in the original Christmas story too, Herod. You know, that could be a bit of a problem if it seems that what we call this Christmas story has such caricature characters. It could make it harder to take this Herod seriously. That could make it harder for us to regard this whole Christmas story as an account that you can believe in. And that's the theme that we've been following up in these short talks leading to Christmas this year. Is it a Christmas that you can believe in? We have looked at what is written so far about three characters, Joseph and Elizabeth and Mary. It seemed to me that some of the almost incidental details there make the accounts of Matthew and Luke very believable. Joseph pondering long and hard whether to divorce Mary. Elizabeth childless for so long that when finally she miraculously fell pregnant with the child we would call John the Baptist, she failed to notice that there was something far bigger going on around her. And Mary, sufficiently unawed by her angelic visitor, that she interrupts to insist that it's just not possible for her to have the child in the normal way. But now, Herod. We didn't even read on to see just how monstrous he was. We left it when the wise men sneaked off back home by a different route, leaving Herod in the dark about the precise location of Jesus. We'll come back to mention his incredibly vicious response before we close, but seriously, isn't this Herod the king in his raging so much of a caricature of evil that maybe it takes it difficult to take him and the whole story really seriously? Can he really feature as part of a Christmas that you can believe in? I'd just like to make a couple of comments on this account we've just read, just to show that, in my opinion, any such worries are unfounded. First of all, let's get back right to the start of this section and see just how profoundly realistic those familiar words are. Oh, by the way, just in passing, Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, we're probably looking at least a year later, to judge by the details of the massacre that Herod later instigates. So our traditional manger scene, with these guys elbowing for room alongside the shepherds, is simply muddle-headed. The shepherds were long gone, the lambs might already have been mutton, and Mary and Joseph are now living in a house, not a stable. Anyway, carrying on with Matthew 2, verse 1. In the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Not kings as such, but still very well-to-do, and there's no chance that it would have been just the traditional 3 people only trekking across the desert. They are rich enough to have a considerable retinue, and their arrival would certainly make a stir just by itself. But notice what they're asking. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Now, stuff about astrology by itself wouldn't have caused too much of a concern. But see how they are interpreting this star, whatever is meant by star there. Would it be a literal star in the sky? Would it be what we nowadays call a comet? Is it some noteworthy astrological conjunction of heavenly bodies? I don't think we can be totally sure on that point, but none of those possibilities would account for what we're told happened next. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. What is just so realistic about this? It's that Herod liked to call himself the King of the Jews. Only he wasn't Jewish. He was Idumean and an Edomite, not Jewish. So technically he couldn't be the King of the Jews. He has tried to endear himself to the Jewish people by building a magnificent temple in Jerusalem, or maybe seriously upgrading what passed for a temple beforehand. But if there is someone in the offing who has been born King of the Jews, well, you can bet your bottom dollar that this is a potential threat that Herod is not going to ignore. Even if he weren't as paranoid as we know him to be, I'll show you some of that in a moment, this has got to be unsettling is an understatement. If he already has a reputation for violence, yes, if Herod is troubled, then everyone around him is going to be on edge, walking on eggshells too. You bet that precisely as Matthew says, he was troubled and all Jerusalem with him. So there's my first point. His initial response is exactly what we should expect. It rings totally true. And my second point, when he interviews these foreign VIPs, that does too. It's a very sneaky bit of duplicity and deceit. Goodness, I would hate to play poker with a guy like that. So when they have worked out that the likely location is Bethlehem, he presents himself as an amazingly genial, an amazingly enlightened monarch. And he sent them to Bethlehem saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Now we all know, because we've read on or heard the conclusion of the account before, that this is just a total sham. He is undoubtedly planning to send a hit squad in to remove this potential threat to his reign. He is known to be ready to use deadly force to maintain his position of unquestioned authority, even on far less serious matters than a possible true heir to the throne that he's occupying. So, for example, when previously some young disciples of religious teachers took down the golden eagle that Herod had erected on the temple, he had them executed. But while we are starting to hiss as if this is a pantomime plot, and King Brat, or whoever it is, turns to the audience to gloat over the coming success of his evil plan and exits the stage with the deepest and blackest of insane cackles, I say no to that comparison. Because Matthew doesn't record the wise men saying anything to each other along the lines of, hey, you sure we can trust this guy? Remember that these are people who were probably very familiar with high-level court and palace intrigues back in their own country. But it looks as if Herod has done a masterly performance here. Even if you suggest it's only a confirmation of their suspicions, I'm not sure it's fair to surmise even that. It takes a special intervention to make sure they don't return to Herod with the fatal information. Verse 12, and being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So no, Herod is not a pantomime villain. He's far too good in his job of staying in power for that. His nasty little scheme, as far as I can see, might very, very nearly have accomplished his intentions. So that's my second point. For all that he is vicious, as we'll see in a moment, he is no idiot in his palace. He really isn't the caricature we sometimes make him out to be. But he is a thoroughly nasty bit of work. And going into a rage like this, when he finds out he's been deceived, I reckon is entirely the kind of thing you could expect from an absolute ruler with low regard for the lives of others. So, verse 16, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. And that fits perfectly with other known historical facts about Herod. For example, and here's a rather long quote, so protective was Herod of his power, so jealous of potential rivals, that his more popular brother-in-law, a very young high priest, had a drowning, quote mark, accident in a pool that archaeology shows was very shallow. When Herod's favourite wife, Mariamne, a Maccabean princess, was falsely accused of adultery, he had her strangled, though he later named a tower in his palace in her honour, which I'm sure made her feel a lot better. Herod executed 2 of his sons who were falsely accused of plotting against him. 5 days before he died, he executed another son. That was the one who had falsely framed the other 2. So much did Herod crave honour, it is said that when he was on his deathbed, he ordered many nobles arrested. He thought that if many people were executed on the day that he died, he could ensure that there would be mourning rather than celebration at the time of his death. So do you think someone like that would hesitate to send a squad of stormtroopers to wipe out any male infants in a nearby village? You bet they would. It all fits. For all that we might like to dress up Herod as a larger-than-life pantomime villain, that just won't do. It really is, as I've been saying all along, a Christmas you can believe in. What we've also got with Herod, I think, is a perfect picture of how this world currently works. There are 2 kingdoms, and they're opposed to each other. Each kingdom is ruled by a king with characters very different from each other. There's the kingdom of this world that will seek to maintain its position by force, but it's ultimately doomed to fail. In any case, its power is usurped. It's not inherent. It's not properly inherited. Herod, remember, cannot be the true king of the Jews, even if he claims that title, even if he insists that all those around him use it. And in time, a true heir to that throne will come and claim his own. There is one who has been born King of the Jews. As we regularly sing at this time of year, to you in David's town this day is born of David's line a Saviour, who is Christ the Lord. He has the right credentials, but he claims his throne strangely, not by exercise of power, not by crushing his enemies, not storming the temple or the palace, but limping to a hill far away, where stood an old rugged cross. He had answered when asked 30 years later by a Roman governor, almost as brutal as Herod the Great, whether he was indeed that king of the Jews. And his answer was that my kingdom is not of this world, or possibly not yet of this world. Certainly his ways are not of this world. He does not triumph through military might or political chicanery. Instead, it will be a matter of conquering through sacrifice. And as they crucify, cries, Father, forgive. For his is meekness and majesty. He will die to save his people from their sins. And this is not just a Christmas that you can believe in. This is a Christ you can believe in.